The Anchor's Rest pub buzzed with its usual Friday night energy. Groups of friends clustered around wooden tables, their laughter mixing with the sound of clinking glasses and classic rock playing from the jukebox. The warm amber lighting cast a cozy glow over the crowd, making everyone look relaxed and happy after a long work week. Sarah Martinez sat alone at the far end of the bar, nursing a whiskey neat. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore jeans and a plain black t-shirt. Nothing about her appearance screamed military, which was exactly how she liked it. After 18 months of back-to-back deployments, she just wanted to be a regular person for one evening. The bartender, an older man named Pete with graying temples, wiped down glasses while keeping an eye on the crowd. He'd been running this place for 15 years and had seen every type of customer imaginable. Military folks from the nearby base were regulars, though most came in groups. Solo drinkers like the woman at the end of the bar were less common, especially women who carried themselves with such quiet confidence. "Another?" Pete asked, gesturing towards Sarah's nearly empty glass. She shook her head. "I'm good, thanks." 3 stools down from Sarah, a group of Marines had been growing louder with each round. Staff Sergeant Jake Morrison led the pack, his broad shoulders and buzzed haircut making his military background obvious even in civilian clothes. His buddies Lance Corporal Chun and Corporal Williams flanked him, all of them still riding the high from completing a particularly challenging training exercise that afternoon. "No way a woman could handle force recon training," Jake declared, his voice carrying easily across the bar. The physical standard alone would wash most of them out in the first week. Sarah's jaw tightened slightly, but she kept her eyes forward and took another sip of her drink. She'd heard this conversation 1,000 times before in a dozen different bars from men who had no idea what women in the military were actually capable of. Chin shifted uncomfortably. "Come on, Jake. There are plenty of tough women in the Corps." "Sure, in support roles," Jake waved dismissively. "But special operations? That's different. You need upper body strength, mental toughness, the ability to carry a wounded teammate out of hostile territory. Women just don't have what it takes." Williams nodded along, though he looked less convinced than Jake sounded. "I mean, biology is biology, right? Men are built different." Sarah's knuckles whitened as she gripped her glass. She thought about the 14-mile hike she'd completed just 2 days ago, carrying a full pack through mountainous terrain in scorching heat. She remembered the night she'd spent pinned down by enemy fire in Afghanistan, calling in air support while her team extracted wounded civilians. She could still feel the weight of her teammate Rodriguez on her back as she'd carried him 3 miles to the extraction point after he'd taken shrapnel to the leg. "You know what I bet?" Jake continued, his voice getting louder as the alcohol loosened his tongue. "I bet most women who claim they could handle special ops have never even been in real combat. They talk a big game, but when bullets start flying, they freeze up." Pete shot a warning look toward the Marines. "Maybe keep it down a little, fellas. You're not the only customers in here." Jake glanced around the bar, his eyes landing on Sarah for the first time. Something about her rigid posture and the way she held herself caught his attention. "What about you, sweetheart?" he called out. "You think women belong in special forces?" Sarah slowly turned on her stool to face him. Her brown eyes were steady and calm, showing none of the anger that was building inside her. "I think people should be judged on their abilities, not their gender." "That's a nice politically correct answer," Jake said with a smirk. "But we're talking about reality here. Life and death situations where split-second decisions matter. You ever been in combat?" The bar had grown noticeably quieter. Other patrons sensed the tension and turned to watch the exchange. Sarah studied Jake's face, noting the confident way he held himself, the slight swagger that came with being used to physical dominance. "I've seen some action," she said simply. Jake laughed, and his buddies joined in. "Let me guess, you were a mechanic or maybe medical support. That's not the same thing as being on the tip of the spear." Sarah felt something cold settle in her stomach. She'd spent years proving herself in a male-dominated world, earning respect through blood, sweat, and sacrifice. She'd saved lives, completed impossible missions, and earned decorations that most soldiers could only dream of. But to this Marine, she was just another woman talking tough in a bar. "You don't know anything about me," she said quietly. "I know enough," Jake shot back. "I know that when my unit was in Fallujah, we had to carry extra weight because the women in support couldn't handle their full load. I know that every mixed-gender unit I've worked with had to adjust their standards to accommodate the weaker links." Shin put a hand on Jake's shoulder. "Dude, maybe we should just drop it." But Jake was on a roll now, playing to his audience. "No, I'm serious. This whole debate about women in combat roles is ridiculous. There's a reason special operations have been men-only for decades. It's not discrimination, it's just facts." Sarah set her glass down carefully on the bar. When she spoke, her voice was still calm, but there was steel underneath. "What unit were you with in Fallujah?" The question caught Jake off guard. "2nd Battalion, 1st Marines." "What? When were you there?" 2006 to 2007. "Look, what's with the interrogation?" Sarah nodded slowly. She'd been in Iraq during the same period, running classified operations that Marines like Jake would never have heard about. While his unit was conducting standard patrols and raids, her team was deep behind enemy lines, gathering intelligence that would save countless American lives. "Just curious about your experience," she said. "You seem pretty confident about what women can and can't do in combat." Jake's chest puffed out slightly. 18 months of house-to-house fighting will teach you a lot about who you want watching your back. "I'm sure it will," Sarah agreed. "But have you ever worked with any women who were actually in combat roles? Or are you basing your opinions on support personnel who weren't trained for frontline fighting?" The question hit closer to home than Jake wanted to admit. Most of his interactions with military women had indeed been with those in support positions. But he wasn't about to back down in front of his friends and a bar full of people. "I've seen enough to know that when things get serious, you want someone who can physically handle the worst-case scenario," he said. "Someone who won't become a liability when the mission goes sideways." Sarah smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "That's interesting. Tell me, what's the longest you've ever gone without sleep on a mission?" Jake frowned. "What kind of question is that?" "A simple one. How many hours straight have you stayed awake in a combat environment?" "I don't know, maybe 36 hours during one particularly rough stretch." Sarah nodded. "That's respectable. What about carrying capacity? What's the heaviest pack you've humped on a long-range patrol?" Jake was starting to feel like he was being tested, and he didn't like it. "Look, lady, I don't know what game you're playing, but no game," Sarah interrupted. "You're making claims about physical and mental capabilities. I'm curious about your benchmarks." Williams leaned forward. "She's got a point, Jake. You're talking like you're the standard everyone should be measured against." "Shut up, Williams," Jake snapped, his face reddening. He turned back to Sarah. "Fine. I've carried 90 pounds for 12 miles through rough terrain. I've stayed awake for 48 hours during extended operations. I've completed every physical fitness test the Corps has thrown at me. Satisfied?" "Very impressive," Sarah said, and she meant it. Those were solid numbers for any soldier. "But here's what I don't understand. If those are your standards, why are you so sure that no woman could meet them?" Jake's jaw worked as he searched for an answer. Because women just aren't built for it. It's basic biology." "So you've tested every woman in the military against your standards?" "I don't need to. The science is clear." Sarah's smile grew slightly wider. "The science. I see. And this science told you that women couldn't handle the psychological pressure of combat either?" "Among other things, yeah." "Interesting. So when you were in Fallujah, dealing with that 18 months of house-to-house fighting, how did you handle the stress?" Jake shifted uncomfortably. The question brought back memories he'd rather not discuss in a crowded bar. The nightmares, the hypervigilance, the way he'd jumped at unexpected sounds for months after coming home. "I handled it fine," he said curtly. "No issues with anxiety? Sleep problems? Difficulty readjusting to civilian life?" The bar was dead silent now. Jake's friends exchanged glances, knowing their buddy was struggling with some of the issues Sarah had just mentioned. Jake himself felt exposed, like this stranger had somehow seen into parts of his mind he kept locked away. Everyone deals with some adjustment issues, he said defensively. Of course they do, Sarah agreed. Combat is traumatic. It affects everyone differently, regardless of gender. So when you say women can't handle the psychological pressure, what exactly are you basing that on? Jake felt like he was being backed into a corner. This woman was systematically dismantling his arguments, but he couldn't figure out how or why. She seemed to know too much about military operations, about the realities of combat, about the physical and mental demands of special operations. Look, I don't know what your deal is, he said, his voice rising, but I've been there. I've done the job. I know what it takes. I'm sure you do, Sarah said. But you still haven't explained why you think women are inherently incapable of doing the same job. That's when Jake snapped. The alcohol, the frustration of feeling outmaneuvered, and the embarrassment of having his assumptions challenged in public all combined into a surge of anger. He shot to his feet, his stool scraping loudly against the floor. Because they're weak, he shouted. Because when push comes to shove, they fold. Because they're a liability that gets people killed. The words hung in the air like a physical presence. Several other patrons shifted uncomfortably, and Pete reached for the phone to call security. But before anyone could react, Sarah stood up as well. She was about 5'6", several inches shorter than Jake's 6'2" frame. But something in the way she moved, the coiled readiness in her posture, made her seem larger than her physical dimensions. "So you think I'm weak?" she said quietly. "Yeah, I do," Jake snarled, taking a step toward her. "I think you're another wannabe tough girl who's never been tested when it really mattered." That's when Jake made his mistake. Whether it was the alcohol, the adrenaline, or just years of assuming his physical size would intimidate anyone who challenged him, he decided to make his point more forcefully. He lunged forward, reaching out to grab Sarah's shoulder, intending to demonstrate his superior strength. Sarah saw the move coming from a mile away. Jake telegraphed his intention with his body language, shifting his weight and dropping his shoulder before he moved. To someone with Sarah's training, it was like watching someone announce their next move with a bullhorn. Time seemed to slow down as Jake's hand reached toward her. Sarah's body responded with muscle memory built through years of intensive training. She stepped slightly to the side, her hand coming up to intercept Jake's wrist. Her other hand found his elbow, and suddenly, Jake found himself being guided into a movement he hadn't intended. The throw happened so fast that most people in the bar missed exactly what occurred. One moment Jake was lunging toward Sarah. The next he was flying through the air. He hit the floor hard, landing flat on his back with a sound that made everyone wince. The bar erupted in surprised shouts and gasps. Pete came around from behind the bar, ready to break up what he assumed would be a brawl. Chun and Williams jumped to their feet, shocked to see their friend flat on his back. But Sarah hadn't moved from her position. She stood calmly, her hands at her sides, looking down at Jake with the same composed expression she'd worn throughout their entire conversation. Jake lay stunned for a moment, the wind knocked out of him, and his pride even more damaged than his body. He'd been thrown by women during training exercises, but never like this, never with such effortless precision. As he struggled to catch his breath and process what had just happened, one thought kept running through his mind. This woman was not what she appeared to be. Sarah looked around the bar at the faces staring back at her. Some showed surprise, others admiration, and a few displayed fear. She reached into her pocket, pulled out a $20 bill, and placed it on the bar next to her empty glass. "Thanks for the drink, Pete," she said to the bartender. "Sorry about the disturbance." She headed toward the door, stepping carefully around Jake, who was just starting to sit up. As she reached the entrance, she turned back to look at him. "For what it's worth," she said, "I think you're probably a good Marine. But you might want to reconsider some of your assumptions about who can and can't handle combat." The door swung shut behind her, leaving the bar in stunned silence. Jake slowly got to his feet, his face burning with embarrassment and confusion. His friends helped steady him, but he barely noticed their assistance. His mind was racing, trying to figure out who that woman was and how she'd made throwing him look so easy. Pete wiped down the bar where Sarah had been sitting, shaking his head. In 15 years of running this place, I've never seen anything quite like that, he muttered. Chun looked toward the door where Sarah had disappeared. Dude, who do you think she was? Williams helped dust off Jake's shirt. I don't know, but I'm pretty sure we just found out what happens when you mess with someone who actually knows what they're doing. Jake said nothing. He was too busy replaying the last few seconds over and over in his mind, trying to understand how he'd gone from being in control to being flat on his back so quickly. The woman hadn't seemed angry or aggressive. If anything, she looked almost sad, like she was disappointed in him rather than furious. Outside the pub, Sarah walked to her car, her mind churning with emotions she'd been suppressing all evening. She tried to stay calm, tried to engage in rational discussion, but Jake's assumptions and attitude had triggered something deep inside her. All the time she'd been underestimated, all the moments she'd had to prove herself in life-or-death situations, all the men who'd looked at her and seen weakness instead of capability. She sat in her car for a moment before starting the engine, taking deep breaths and letting her heart rate return to normal. The throw had been instinctive, a response built through years of training and refined through real-world applications. She hadn't intended to humiliate Jake, but she needed to make a point that words alone couldn't convey. As she drove away from the anchor's rest, Sarah wondered if the encounter would have any lasting impact. Would Jake reconsider his assumptions about women in combat? Would he think about the conversation and maybe realize that his experiences, while valid, weren't universal? Or would he simply write her off as an anomaly, a fluke that proved nothing about women in general? Back in the bar, the normal Friday night atmosphere slowly returned. People went back to their drinks and conversations, though many kept glancing toward the spot where Jake had landed. The Marines huddled together at their table, speaking in low voices about what had just happened. "I'm telling you guys, that was no ordinary woman," Chun said, nursing a beer and shaking his head. The way she moved, the questions she was asking, the way she threw Jake. That was professional-level stuff. Williams nodded agreement. She knew way too much about military operations. And did you see how calm she stayed throughout the whole thing? Even when Jake was getting aggressive, she never raised her voice or showed any fear. Jake listened to his friend's speculation, but remained silent. He was thinking about the way Sarah had asked her questions, the specific nature of her inquiries about his deployment and experience. She probed his background like someone conducting an intelligence briefing, systematically gathering information before making her own assessments. More troubling was the way she'd anticipated his move. Jake had been in enough fights and training scenarios to recognize superior skill when he encountered it. The woman hadn't just gotten lucky or caught him off guard. She'd read his intentions, controlled the engagement, and neutralized his attack with minimal effort. That level of proficiency didn't come from weekend self-defense classes or casual martial arts training. "You think she was military?" Williams asked quietly. Jake finally spoke up. "Yeah, I think she was military. The question is what kind." The three Marines sat with that thought, each contemplating the implications. If Sarah had been military, her calm confidence and physical skills started to make more sense. But what branch? What specialty? And why had she been sitting alone in a bar, looking like any other civilian? Pete approached their table with a fresh round of beers. "On the house," he said. "Figured you guys might need these after that excitement." "Hey, Pete," Chun said, accepting the beer gratefully. "You ever see that woman in here before?" The bartender shook his head. "First time. But I'll tell you what, she carried herself like someone who'd seen some serious action. The way she stayed calm when your friend got aggressive, that's not normal civilian behavior." Jake took a long pull from his beer, his pride still stinging, but his curiosity growing stronger. She knew too much about military operations to be a civilian. The questions she was asking, the way she talked about deployment experiences and combat stress. "So what are you thinking?" Williams asked. Jake was quiet for a long moment, turning possibilities over in his mind. I'm thinking we just met someone who's done things we've never even heard of. And I'm thinking I made a really bad assumption about what she was capable of. The conversation continued late into the evening, but Jake's thoughts kept returning to Sarah's final words. She'd suggested he reconsider his assumptions about who could handle combat. At the time, he'd been too angry and embarrassed to really hear her. But now, sitting with his friends and nursing his wounded pride along with his beer, he was starting to understand what she might have meant. Maybe his experiences in Iraq, as intense and formative as they'd been, represented only one small piece of a much larger picture. Maybe there were women serving in roles he'd never considered, facing dangers he'd never imagined, proving themselves in ways that never made it into his narrow view of military service. Or maybe, Jake thought with a growing sense of unease, he just challenged someone whose credentials made his own look like basic training. Sarah Martinez drove through the empty streets, her hands steady on the wheel despite the adrenaline still coursing through her system. The encounter at the Anchor's Rest had stirred up memories she'd worked hard to compartmentalize. The Marine's assumptions about women in combat weren't new to her, but they still cut deep every time she encountered them. She pulled into the parking lot of her apartment complex, a modest two-story building that housed mostly young professionals and military personnel stationed at nearby installations. As she climbed the stairs to her second-floor unit, Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from her teammate Lisa Wong. "Drinks tomorrow night? I know you're on leave, but thought you might want to celebrate surviving another deployment without going completely crazy." Sarah smiled despite herself. Lisa was one of the few people who understood the unique challenges of their job. Both women had fought tooth and nail to earn their places in the naval special warfare community, and both had faced skepticism from colleagues who questioned whether women belonged in special operations. Inside her apartment, Sarah poured herself a glass of water and sat on her couch, finally, allowing herself to process the evening's events. The space around her was spartanly decorated but comfortable, with a few personal touches that hinted at her travels. A hand-woven rug from Afghanistan lay in front of the fireplace, and photographs from various deployments were arranged carefully on a bookshelf. Her phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. The caller ID showed her father's number. "Hey, Dad." "Sarah, sweetheart. How are you adjusting to being back stateside?" Colonel Robert Martinez had retired from the Army after 30 years of service, and he understood better than most the challenges of transitioning between deployment and home life. He'd been Sarah's biggest supporter when she'd announced her intention to try out for the SEALs, even as other family members had expressed doubts. "I'm doing okay. Still getting used to having regular sleep schedules and food that doesn't come from a package." Her father chuckled. "That part never gets easy. You know, your mother and I were talking about coming to visit next weekend. Think you'd be up for some family time?" Sarah considered the offer. Part of her wanted the distraction and comfort of family, but another part wasn't ready to answer the inevitable questions about her latest deployment. Her parents knew she served in special operations, but the details of her missions remained classified. "That sounds good, Dad. Just remember that I can't talk about work specifics." "Of course. We're just proud of you, sweetheart. What you've accomplished, the barriers you've broken down. It matters more than you probably realize." After ending the call, Sarah found herself thinking about barriers and assumptions. The Marine at the bar represented a mindset she encountered regularly, even among people who should have known better. The idea that women were inherently unsuited for combat roles persisted despite mounting evidence to the contrary. Meanwhile, across town, Jake Morrison lay in his bed staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. The encounter with Sarah played on repeat in his mind, each detail becoming clearer as the alcohol wore off. The way she'd questioned his experience, the precision of her movement when she'd thrown him, the calm confidence that never wavered even when he'd become aggressive. His phone lit up with a text from Chun. "You awake? Been thinking about tonight." Jake typed back, "Yeah, can't stop thinking about it either. That woman knew things. Military things. The way she asked about deployment details, combat stress, carrying capacity. Those aren't random questions." Jake had reached the same conclusion. Sarah's inquiries had been too specific, too informed to come from casual curiosity. She probed his background like someone who understood military hierarchies, deployment cycles, and the psychological toll of combat operations. "I think I screwed up," Jake texted back. "What do you mean?" "I think she was someone important, someone whose opinion actually matters." Jake set his phone aside and tried to analyze the encounter objectively. Sarah had never claimed to be military, but her knowledge and behavior suggested extensive training and experience. The throw that had put him on the floor demonstrated skills far beyond civilian self-defense classes. It had been executed with the kind of precision that came from years of professional instruction and real-world application. More troubling was the realization that his assumptions might have cost him an opportunity to learn from someone with genuine expertise. Instead of engaging in meaningful dialogue, he dismissed her perspectives and ultimately resorted to physical intimidation. The memory of lunging at her made him cringe with embarrassment. The next morning, Sarah met Lisa for coffee at a small cafe near the base. Lisa was everything that stereotypes suggested women in special operations should not be: petite and soft-spoken with a background in mathematics. But appearances were deceiving. Lisa had completed some of the most challenging missions in their unit's history, earning respect through competence and courage. "You look like you didn't sleep much," Lisa observed, stirring sugar into her coffee. "Had an interesting encounter at a bar last night. A Marine with strong opinions about women in combat roles." Lisa's expression darkened. "Let me guess. We're too weak, too emotional, too much of a liability. All of the above. Plus some theories about how biology makes us inherently unsuited for special operations. Please tell me you set him straight." Sarah described the conversation and its physical conclusion. Lisa listened with growing amazement and occasional bursts of laughter. "You threw a Marine across a bar?" "Sarah, that's either the best thing I've heard all week or the worst, depending on the consequences. That's what I'm worried about. What if he files a complaint? What if this somehow gets back to command?" Lisa shook her head. "From what you're describing, he grabbed you first. That's assault. You defended yourself using minimal force. Besides, do you really think a Marine is going to report that a woman half his size put him on the ground in front of a crowded bar?" Sarah had to admit that Lisa had a point. Jake's ego had taken enough of a beating without adding an official complaint to the mix. Still, she worried about potential repercussions from the encounter. "The thing that bothers me most," Sarah continued, "is how automatic his assumptions were. He didn't even consider the possibility that a woman might have real combat experience. In his mind, we're all support personnel pretending to be tough." Lisa nodded grimly. "I've seen it before. Some people are so invested in their preconceptions that evidence to the contrary doesn't register. They'll dismiss exceptions as anomalies rather than question their basic beliefs." Back at his apartment, Jake was conducting research on his laptop. He'd started by searching for information about women in special operations, something he realized he'd never seriously investigated despite having strong opinions on the subject. What he found challenged many of his assumptions. Articles detailed the success of female operatives in various elite units. Combat veterans described working alongside women who'd proven themselves under fire. Statistics showed that properly trained women could meet the physical demands of special operations when given the opportunity. More specifically, Jake discovered information about the Navy SEALs' recent integration efforts. While the program was still in its early stages, several women had successfully completed portions of the training pipeline. The details were limited due to security classifications, but the implications were clear. Women were not only participating in special operations, they were succeeding. Jake's phone rang, interrupting his research. The caller was his older brother, Mike, a Navy officer stationed in Norfolk. "Hey, little brother. Mom said you were back from deployment. How are you adjusting?" "It's going okay. Mike, can I ask you something? You know anyone in Navy special operations?" Mike's tone became more serious. "A few people." "What?" Jake hesitated, unsure how to explain his sudden interest without revealing the embarrassing details of the previous night. "I've been thinking about some assumptions I've made about women in combat roles. wondering if I might be wrong about some things. That's surprisingly introspective of you. What brought this on? Just something that happened recently. Made me realize I might not know as much as I thought I did. Mike was quiet for a moment. Without getting into classified territory, I can tell you that some of the most impressive operators I've worked with have been women. They bring different skills to the table, and they've proven themselves in situations that would challenge anyone. Really, there's a mindset that success in special operations is purely about physical strength, but that's not accurate. Mental toughness, adaptability, technical skills, emotional intelligence. These qualities matter as much as raw physical capability, sometimes more. Jake absorbed his brother's words, feeling his worldview shift slightly. Have you worked directly with any female special operators? I can't get specific, but yes. And I'll tell you this, anyone who thinks women can't handle the pressure of special operations hasn't been paying attention to what's actually happening in the field. After the call, Jake returned to his research with renewed focus. He found accounts of female operatives conducting surveillance missions, participating in direct action raids, and providing crucial intelligence in hostile environments. The stories were often heavily redacted due to security concerns, but the pattern was clear. Women were not only participating in special operations, they were excelling. That evening, Jake found himself back at the Anchor's Rest. He told himself he was just meeting friends for a drink, but part of him hoped he might see Sarah again. He wanted to apologize for his behavior and maybe learn more about her background. Pete recognized him immediately. Back again? Hope you're planning to keep things civilized tonight. Actually, I was hoping that woman from last night might show up again. I owe her an apology. Pete shook his head. Haven't seen her since Friday. But between you and me, I've been thinking about that encounter. The way she handled herself, the things she said. That was an amateur hour. Chun and Williams arrived shortly after, and the three Marines found themselves discussing the previous night's events again. But this time, Jake's perspective had shifted. I've been doing some research, he admitted, about women in special operations. Turns out I might have been wrong about some things. Williams raised an eyebrow. Wrong how? Wrong as in there are women currently serving in roles I didn't think they were allowed to do. Wrong as in some of them have combat records that put mine to shame. Chun leaned forward with interest. So you think that woman last night was special operations? Jake considered the question carefully. I think she was someone who knew a lot more about military operations than she let on. And I think I made an ass of myself by assuming she didn't. The conversation was interrupted when Jake noticed a familiar figure entering the bar. Lisa Wong walked in alone, scanning the room as if looking for someone. She was dressed casually in jeans and a sweater, but something in her bearing reminded Jake of Sarah. Lisa approached the bar and ordered a drink, then turned to survey the crowd. Her gaze fell on Jake and his friends, and she seemed to recognize them from Sarah's description. After a moment of consideration, she walked over to their table. "Excuse me," she said politely. "You're the Marines who were here Friday night, right? The ones who had the discussion with my friend Sarah?" Jake felt his stomach drop. "Yeah, that was us. Is she okay? I mean, I didn't hurt her or anything, did I?" Lisa's expression was carefully neutral. "She's fine. Actually, she wanted me to give you something." She reached into her purse and pulled out a small military patch. The design showed a trident surrounded by an eagle and anchor with SEAL Team written below. Jake recognized it immediately as a Navy SEAL Team patch, though the specific unit number had been removed. "She thought you might be interested in this," Lisa said, placing the patch on the table. Jake stared at the patch, his mind racing. "Is this hers?" "I can't get into specifics about anyone's service record," Lisa replied carefully. "But I thought you might appreciate knowing that your assumptions about women in special operations might need some updating." Chun picked up the patch, examining it closely. "This is real." Lisa nodded. "Very real. The person who wore that patch earned it through the same training pipeline as any male SEAL. Same physical standards, same mental challenges, same commitment to excellence." Williams looked stunned. "So Sarah is someone who dedicated her life to serving her country in one of the most elite military units in the world, Lisa finished. She's conducted operations in some of the most dangerous places on Earth, and she saved lives in situations most people can't imagine. Jake felt a wave of shame wash over him. He'd spent Friday night lecturing a Navy SEAL about what women could and couldn't do in combat. He dismissed her experience and ultimately tried to physically intimidate someone whose training and capabilities far exceeded his own. "I need to apologize to her," he said quietly. Lisa studied his face, seeming to evaluate his sincerity. "She's not angry with you. Disappointed, maybe, but not angry. She's encountered attitudes like yours before. That doesn't make it right." "No, it doesn't. But it makes it educational. The question is what you do with that education." Lisa finished her drink and prepared to leave. "For what it's worth, Sarah said you seemed like a good Marine who'd been shaped by limited experiences. She hoped that learning more about the full scope of military service might broaden your perspective." After Lisa left, the three Marines sat in silence, staring at the seal patch on their table. The weight of Jake's misconceptions pressed down on him like a physical burden. "I can't believe I tried to grab a Navy SEAL," he said finally. Chin shook his head in amazement. "Dude, you're lucky she just threw you. With her training, she could have really hurt you. That's what makes it worse," Jake realized. "She showed restraint. She used minimal force when she could have done real damage. Even after I disrespected her service and everything she'd accomplished." Williams picked up the patch again. "So what now? Do we try to find her and apologize?" Jake considered the question. He wanted to make amends for his behavior, but he also recognized that Sarah didn't know him anything. She'd already shown more patience and understanding than he deserved. "I think the best apology is changing how I think about these issues," he said finally, "not making the same assumptions about the next woman I meet." The Marines continued their conversation late into the evening, but the dynamic had fundamentally changed. Instead of reinforcing each other's preconceptions, they found themselves questioning beliefs they'd held without examination. Jake shared what he'd learned from his research, and Chun and Williams contributed their own observations about capable women they'd served alongside. By the end of the night, Jake had made a decision. He was going to use his experience with Sarah as a teachable moment, both for himself and others. The next time he heard someone dismiss women's capabilities in combat roles, he would speak up with facts instead of assumptions. He carefully pocketed the seal patch, planning to keep it as a reminder of an important lesson learned. Sometimes the most valuable education came from discovering how much you didn't know. 3 weeks after the incident at the Anchor's Rest, Jake Morrison found himself in an unexpected situation. His commanding officer had assigned him to a joint training exercise with Navy personnel, including members of special operations units. The irony wasn't lost on him as he prepared his gear for what promised to be an educational experience. The training facility buzzed with activity as Marines, Navy SEALs, and other special operations personnel prepared for a complex multi-day exercise. Jake tried to focus on equipment checks, but his mind kept wandering to the seal patch in his wallet and the lesson it represented. "Morrison," Gunnery Sergeant Rodriguez called out, "you're assigned to Team Delta for urban warfare scenarios. Report to Lieutenant Commander Hayes for briefing." Jake made his way across the staging area, noting the mix of personnel from different branches and specialties. The diversity of the group was striking, including several women who carried themselves with the unmistakable confidence of experienced operators. Lieutenant Commander Hayes turned out to be a weathered veteran with intelligence in his eyes and scars on his hands that spoke of extensive field experience. He looked up as Jake approached, consulting a roster on his clipboard. "Staff Sergeant Morrison, good to have you with us. Your unit has a solid reputation for urban operations." "Thank you, sir. Looking forward to working with your people." Hayes gestured toward a group of operators conducting equipment checks nearby. "Your team leader will be Chief Petty Officer Martinez. She's got extensive experience in these types of operations, so pay attention to what she teaches you." Jake's heart stopped. The name Martinez couldn't be a coincidence, but he needed visual confirmation before jumping to conclusions. He followed Hayes toward the group, his palms beginning to sweat despite the cool morning air. Sarah Martinez looked up from her rifle as they approached, her expression neutral and professional. She wore full tactical gear with no visible rank insignia, but her bearing made it clear she was in charge of the team. When her eyes met Jake's, there was a flicker of recognition, but no animosity. "Chief Martinez, meet Staff Sergeant Morrison. He'll be augmenting your team for the exercise." Sarah nodded professionally. "Welcome to Team Delta, Staff Sergeant. Have you worked joint special operations exercises before?" Jake found his voice, though it came out slightly hoarse. "Some joint training, yes ma'am, but nothing this comprehensive." "Understood. We'll bring you up to speed." The scenario involves a hostage rescue in a complex urban environment. Multiple entry points, civilian populations, and time-sensitive objectives. As Hayes moved on to brief other teams, Sarah turned to introduce Jake to his temporary teammates. The group consisted of 6 operators, including 2 other women and 3 men who radiated the quiet competence of elite soldiers. "This is Petty Officer Chun, our communications specialist," Sarah said, indicating a compact Asian woman with alert eyes. "Petty Officer Rodriguez handles explosives and breaching. Chief Walker is our medic." Jake shook hands with each team member, noting their professional demeanor and obvious expertise. None of them seemed to find it unusual that their team leader was a woman, which drove home how much his own assumptions had been shaped by limited exposure. "What's your background, Morrison?" asked Chief Walker, a tall African-American man with graying temples. "Infantry, multiple deployments to Iraq and Afghanistan. Some urban operations experience, but mostly standard Marine tactics." Rodriguez, a stocky Hispanic woman with calloused hands, nodded approvingly. "Good foundation. Today we'll show you how special operations approaches urban warfare differently." Sarah spread a detailed floor plan across a nearby table. The target building has 12 rooms across 3 floors. Intelligence indicates 6 hostiles for civilians and unknown additional threats. "We have 27 minutes from initial breach to extraction." She pointed to various entry points marked on the plan. Standard approach would be front door, stairs, clear room by room. Too slow and too predictable. "We're going to use a coordinated multi-level assault with precise timing." Jake studied the plan, noting the complexity of the proposed operation. "How do we coordinate movement between floors without radio communication giving away our positions?" "Good question," Sarah replied. "Chun has developed a system using tactical hand signals and delayed electronic beacons. Each team member gets specific timing marks based on the mission clock." Chun spread out a series of diagrams showing hand signals and timing sequences. "Visual communication until we're in position, then minimal radio traffic using coded brevity codes. Each operator has primary and secondary objectives based on situational developments." As the briefing continued, Jake found himself impressed by the level of detail and sophistication in the planning. Every contingency seemed to have been considered, every timing mark calculated for maximum efficiency. This wasn't the straightforward room-clearing tactics he was used to, but a complex orchestration requiring split-second decision-making and absolute trust between team members. "What's my role in all this?" Jake asked. Sarah looked at him appraisingly. "You'll be paired with Rodriguez for the second-floor breach. Your job is to follow her lead, provide covering fire when needed, and adapt to changing circumstances. Think you can handle taking orders from a woman?" The question hung in the air for a moment. Jake met her gaze steadily, remembering the lessons of the past few weeks. "Yes, ma'am. I'm here to learn." Sarah nodded, seemingly satisfied with his response. "Good. Rodriguez is one of the best operators I've worked with. You'll learn things today that could save your life in future operations." The team spent the next 2 hours rehearsing movements, practicing hand signals, and discussing contingency plans. Jake quickly realized that his Marine training, while solid, represented only one approach to military operations. The SEAL techniques emphasize speed, precision, and adaptability in ways that challenge his preconceptions about tactical doctrine. Rodriguez proved to be an exceptional teacher, patiently explaining the reasoning behind each technique while demonstrating movements with fluid efficiency. Her expertise with explosive charges was particularly impressive, as she showed Jake how to use minimal force for maximum effect while protecting civilian populations. The key, she explained while rigging a practice charge, is thinking 3 steps ahead. What happens after the breach? How do we move through the space? Where are the civilians most likely to be? Every action has to consider the entire mission, not just the immediate objective. As the exercise began, Jake found himself operating at a level of intensity and precision he'd never experienced before. Sarah's team moved through the training facility like water flowing around obstacles, each member anticipating the other's movements and adjusting seamlessly to changing conditions. When they encountered an unexpected civilian in the hallway, Rodriguez made split-second adjustments to her breach plan, using alternative charges that minimized blast effects while still achieving their objective. Jake provided covering fire while she worked, marveling at her ability to improvise under pressure. The hostage rescue scenario unfolded with clockwork precision. Sarah coordinated 3 simultaneous breaches while Chun managed communications between teams and the command post. Walker treated simulated wounded civilians while maintaining security, and each team member executed their assignments with professional excellence. Jake's role proved more challenging than expected. Following Rodriguez's lead required him to suppress his instincts and trust her judgment completely. When she signaled for him to hold position while she cleared a room alone, every fiber of his Marine training screamed that he should be leading the charge. But he held back, watching as she efficiently neutralized multiple targets with techniques he'd never seen before. The entire operation concluded in 24 minutes, 3 minutes ahead of schedule. All hostages were rescued, all threats eliminated, and no civilian casualties occurred. As the team regrouped for debriefing, Jake felt both exhilarated and humbled by what he'd witnessed. "Outstanding execution," announced Lieutenant Commander Hayes over the radio. Team Delta achieved all primary objectives with textbook precision. Particularly impressive coordination between services. During the after-action review, Sarah led a detailed discussion of what had worked well and what could be improved. Her analysis was thorough and professional, highlighting individual contributions while identifying areas for tactical refinement. "Morrison," she said, "how did you find working with Rodriguez?" Jake chose his words carefully. "Eye-opening, ma'am. Her technical skills and tactical thinking were exceptional. I learned techniques today that I'll definitely take back to my unit." Rodriguez smiled. "You adapted well to our methods. Most Marines want to kick down doors and charge forward. You showed patience and situational awareness." As the formal debriefing concluded, team members began cleaning weapons and packing gear. Jake found himself working alongside Sarah, checking radio equipment and securing sensitive materials. "Can I ask you something?" he said quietly. Sarah looked up from her gear. "Shoot, that night at the bar, why didn't you just tell me you were a SEAL? It would have ended the argument pretty quickly." Sarah was quiet for a moment, considering her response. "Would it have? Or would you have just found other reasons to dismiss what I was saying? Sometimes people need to confront their assumptions on their own terms." Jake nodded slowly. "You were right. If you told me, I probably would have assumed you were lying or exaggerating. I needed to see for myself. The thing is," Sarah continued, "I encounter attitudes like yours pretty regularly. Men who think they know what women can and can't do based on limited experience or outdated assumptions. I've learned that arguing rarely changes minds. So you let me make a fool of myself instead." Sarah's expression softened slightly. "I'll let you reveal your own preconceptions. What you did with that information was up to you." Jake pulled the seal patch from his wallet, holding it out to her. "Your friend Lisa gave me this. Said you thought I might need some education." Sarah took the patch, turning it over in her hands. "This is from my first team assignment. A lot of memories attached to it. Good memories? Mixed. Some incredible highs, some difficult challenges. Like any military service, really. She handed the patch back to him. Keep it. Consider it a reminder that expertise comes in many forms. Jake pocketed the patch carefully. I owe you an apology. For that night, for my assumptions, for the way I behaved. Apology accepted. But the real test isn't saying you're sorry. It's what you do the next time you encounter someone who challenges your preconceptions. Their conversation was interrupted by Rodriguez calling out equipment assignments for the next day's training. As Jake gathered his gear, he reflected on how much his perspective had shifted over the past few weeks. The woman he dismissed as weak and unsuitable for combat had just led one of the most impressive military operations he'd ever witnessed. Her team had executed a complex mission with precision and professionalism that exceeded anything he'd experienced in his Marine career. That evening, Jake called his brother Mike to share the day's experiences. "So, you actually got to work with some of those female operators I mentioned," Mike said with obvious amusement. "How did that go?" Humbling, Jake admitted. The team leader was the woman from the bar. Turns out she's not just a SEAL, she's an exceptional SEAL. Her tactical thinking and operational planning were off the charts. I'm not surprised. The women who make it through special operations training tend to be remarkable individuals. They have to be, given the additional scrutiny they face. Jake described the day's training exercise, emphasizing the level of coordination and expertise he'd witnessed. The thing that struck me most was how seamlessly the team functioned. Nobody questioned her leadership or seemed to think it was unusual. They just focused on executing the mission. That's what professionalism looks like, Mike observed, when people are judged on their capabilities rather than their demographics. Over the following days, the joint training exercise continued with increasing complexity. Jake found himself working with different teams and learning from operators with diverse backgrounds and specialties. Each experience reinforced the lesson that competence came in many forms and that his previous assumptions have been both limited and limiting. On the final day of training, Sarah approached him during equipment turn-in. "I understand you'll be rotating back to your unit tomorrow," she said. "Yes, ma'am. This has been an incredible learning experience." "Good. I hope you'll share what you've learned with your Marines. Help them understand that diversity in tactics and personnel makes units stronger, not weaker." Jake nodded seriously. "I intend to. I've also been thinking about ways to challenge assumptions in my own unit. Maybe invite some female Marines to share their deployment experiences, get people thinking beyond stereotypes." That's a good start. Change happens one conversation at a time, one mind at a time. As Jake prepared to leave the training facility, he realized that the encounter at the Anchor's Rest had initiated a transformation in his thinking that extended far beyond military operations. He'd learned to question his assumptions, to remain open to perspectives that challenged his worldview, and to recognize expertise regardless of its packaging. The SEAL patch in his wallet had become more than just a reminder of an embarrassing evening. It represented the possibility of growth, the value of humility, and the importance of judging people by their actions rather than preconceptions. Months later, Jake would look back on the training exercise as a turning point in both his military career and personal development. The lessons learned from Sarah Martinez and her team had made him a better Marine, a better leader, and a better person. But perhaps most importantly, he'd learned that strength, courage, and competence weren't limited by gender, race, or any other demographic characteristic. They were qualities that emerged from dedication, training, and the willingness to push beyond perceived limitations. The woman who had thrown him across a bar had taught him one of the most valuable lessons of his military career. Sometimes the best teachers come disguised as challenges to everything you think you know about the world.